Hi, I'm Brett Findlay from OneGroup Insurance and Risk Management, and we're here today to tell you a little story, right, about OneGroup, where we've been, where we're going, and how we like to interact with our clients. And there's really nobody better to tell that story than our architect, right, our engineer, our CEO, Pierre Morrisseau. Thank you for joining me this morning, Pierre.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks for those kind words.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot more where that came from, because realistically, he did drive the vision behind the scenes, and he provided us the resources to kind of build what we've built here. He built the blueprint for us. So I think just right off the bat, what I'd ask you is, I've had the good fortune of working alongside you for almost 15 years here. There's been a lot of growth and evolution from the agency during that time frame. What do you think maybe the biggest factor or factors have been to kind of influence that growth?
Yeah, one of the great things about our organization is we didn't really just start out being insurance people. We started being something else. I have an engineering background. I grew up around construction and construction. You grew up around construction and construction. I grew up around businesses and small businesses. So we really look at the world not as to transact the insurance policy, which all of us can do well as brokers, but how do we actually work with businesses to help them manage risk, leverage it in some cases? How does it give them a competitive advantage? But most importantly, just be there to help their businesses grow and do what they want to do.
You're hitting the nail on the head for kind of what my thought process is here. I think what we do differently and what we do very well is we're able to interact with business owners, understand what they're doing, and build those solutions around them. So I think that's what I'd ask you, if you could kind of summarize what you built for us over the years and how we communicate with clients. What's your vision for what the client-agent relationship or client-agency relationship looks like?
It's a great question. So I would say one of the first elements is it's not a once-a-year thing. I think our business, generally rotates around the renewal, so we think of it as a once-a-year thing as an industry, but we think of it as an all-year thing. Obviously, there's the normal response and things to get certificates and the responsive things that I think all of us do locally very well. But I think what's different is when we can become an intimate business partner with you. A very successful person in the business world told me the three most important people in his business world were his attorney, his accountant, and his insurance advisor, especially in the construction industry. So I think what we're trying to do is create not only just access to you as the lead person, Brett, but to all of our resources inside the organization to routinely help you with business issues.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'd also like to hit on is, I was a younger man when you brought me in, right? A little bit different personality probably.
Me too. I think I had a little more hair at the time too, Brett.
But one thing is, we had a vision for what we could do in construction, and you provided resources for that before we really had the business to back it up. So in the construction world, I think that's been invaluable, and some of those resources come from our business services and solutions unit. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about the people in that unit. And it goes exactly back to what you said about the people that we have. We brought in people who are good at certain things, who I like to say we go a mile deep, not a mile wide with our personnel. So within that business services and solutions unit, we have risk management, we have contractual risk transfer, we have HR solutions, and we have claims management. Right? So each of those play a pivotal role, especially with construction clients. Talk a little bit about, if you would, the risk management team and maybe where they can drive results.
Yeah, so I'll back up a little bit. I didn't know anything about insurance when I started in this industry out of college, and it was from the engineering and risk management side of the equation. And so what you really start to look at on the carrier side is, what are people's exposures, and how do we price the product? There's really another question in there is like, why are you buying the insurance?
Yeah.
So it's a question I ask everyone from Fortune 500 risk managers all the way down, and it's kind of funny because we're in this notion of we do it because we do it. But there's actually really specific reasons that you want to have a strategy around why you buy insurance. So for example, if your building burns down, yes, you can get insurance to rebuild it, but it could take 6 months to a year in that 6 months of the year, you could lose your clients.
Yeah.
And so what do you really need the insurance for? Well, you need the insurance for to keep your clients. So what's the strategy to do that? It's to have an alternative plan to keep delivering the services. And then we want insurance to pay for the additional cost that's going to be. So building the plan, that's outside of insurance, but something we would help you do.
Yeah.
And then buying the insurance is figuring out how much you need and what that should be, which is more traditional.
And risk management is crucial to that because they can identify the risks and the exposures for the clients, help them navigate that, and then as the team works on it holistically to build that custom solution.
Exactly, and there's a lot of elements to it. So it's more than risk management. When you think about it, it's risk exposure. And a lot of times in construction, at least when I was working on it, I thought of risk management is, are you following the rules and wearing the eye protection and hard hats? And those are important foundations, but the real reality is, what are we doing to mitigate the more global risk? So, and one of those is the contract relationship we have with all of the subcontractors and the vendors. That's one of those. Another is with people and talent and hiring. Another is when something happens, do we have the right processes and procedures and sort in place to deal with it? Right? And that's obviously claims, but it's also just, what do we do to mitigate unexpected outcomes, which happen all the time in construction. I mean, it's an everyday kind of event. Some of them are manageable, but some of them require, more thought process and a bigger support team. So then when you look at what we did with the business services, you have risk management. Yes, it's regulatory. OSHA, that's a regulatory risk. We don't want to get fines. And the second is, how do we keep people from being injured? It's hard to find people. Obviously, we don't want to injure them, but when they're injured, how do we get them back to work? So that's what we do after the injury happens and the claim happens. And our claims people deal with strategies around that. You have, the subcontractors in their relationship. You have the surety exposures. You have, how do we deal with labor law, right? Yeah. Which is, unfortunately, now we are the only state that has strict liability with labor law. So you have to be able to deal with it, and you have to have the right issue or the right contractual risk transfer in place to mitigate your exposure. It also allows you to do what you want to do. So if you can think about the continuum, they all kind of revolve around people. People is the number one issue. So we have claims risk management, we have risk management, we have HR and support. HR issues exist everywhere in the universe, and I've never met a business owner who hasn't had to deal with a difficult HR issue. And then you have the contractual risk transfer. We tie all of that together. We look at it as one single issue. The other thing we think about when you worry about is, okay, what's the price of insurance? Well, the price of insurance is dictated by how well the carrier feels that you're doing a job to mitigate these risks, along with what the more global environment of risk is doing. So it's the two together. So when we can paint a better story for them, when we can paint it with your words, we can negotiate better pricing.
And that's the key, right? Because I look at everything, I have to see it almost like a picture. And what you just summed up pretty succinctly with the Business Services and Solutions unit is how we insulate or attempt to insulate a client from risk, right? On the front end, we identify it, and then we've got personnel in place to make sure they mitigate it as the process goes if they have an exposure to it, right? Okay, this is where you have risk. This is where a claim could happen. This is what we do in the event that a claim does happen. This is how it translates to your entire program. And what you just said, I think, is the most important part of all of this. Being able to take that and tell that story and how the client's utilizing the services paints the better picture, which drives the pricing, which is a very important component, right?
We need to reduce the pricing. It's an overhead cost.
It's an overhead cost. And those are all the buttons you push that a carrier wants to see to basically drive the best program for the client.
Yeah, and that's the part about leveraging risk, because when you're competing in that world, you're competing against other people who have to buy insurance. So this gives you a competitive advantage on the everyday cost, but also a competitive advantage if something does happen, then you have the right resources in place to respond to it.
And if we don't have that relationship with the business on the front end to understand them as well as we do, really tough to paint that picture for the carriers on the back end.
Yeah, a lot of people I'm an engineer and I ended up being a salesperson at some point. People go, well, that seems a little bit of an odd twist. I go, not really. In this role and what we do, we are problem solvers, and engineering is problem solving. It's just I have the context of looking at it from the perspective of how do we help the business. That was my job for a number of years. And I think when you think about it that way, the starting point isn't, let me go quote your insurance. The starting point is, let me understand you.
Yep.
Let me understand your goals. Let me help you understand the opportunities, and then we'll figure out the rest in terms of how to merge that. The other important aspect too is especially when you run a business, you can't fix everything at once. You just can't do that. There's not enough resources or time in the world. And so the reality is we also help you prioritize. We work on your goals and how far do you want to go? We can provide you with the spectrum, but you decide, and then we come in. You asked earlier how we interact. We interact with you through the course of the year to help you get there at your pace.
I think what you're saying there's so much importance to it, because as a younger insurance professional, a lot of times you go in and you want to tell them all the great things you do. We have this, we have this, we have this. That's not what starts the relationship. That's not what builds a relationship. What builds a relationship is going in and saying, hey, thank you for your time. Tell me about your business. Let me understand what keeps you up at night. And then applying that back to what we can provide to help or mitigate that, but also to educate them on what really drives the insurance marketplace so they can understand it and then apply it back and push it out to them.
It's funny, I get asked a lot of time, like, what's the best insurance solution? Captive, self-insurance. I go, it depends on two things, you and where we are in points in time. No one thing is the right answer. And it's actually the same with risk management. No one thing is the right answer. So I would say really dedicating it to you specifically and the nuance of what we need to do. And sometimes we don't know when we go in. We know as a result of working with you. I always say we do not have all the answers. Mm-hmm. We probably only have a few of them if we're being realistic.
Just ask my wife. She'll tell you how far I have.
My wife will tell you I need a lot of direction, but the point is, though, we're willing to go find them, and I think that's what makes us stronger every day. That's what's allowed us to get better and more knowledgeable, is we're willing to work with you to find the answers, and we don't assume we know them.
Yeah, no, the day you assume you know all the answers is the day you know nothing, right? Like, I know who to ask the questions to. I think that's important. So your background on that side of it, I think, is critical to the growth, because you were willing to invest in those resources before we really had the revenue.
You mean my willingness to hire you, Brett?
That's exactly what I mean. We can try to dress up that statement however we want, but that's exactly what I mean. And I think it's been so critical to our growth and our long-term relationships with our clients. So what was it? What was it? Was it your background, or what was the thought process on the front end to invest in that before we really had it?
Yeah, so I came from the carrier side. I built a consulting company in between there, and joined legacy John Bailey and John Haskell. So OneGroup, for people that don't know, was really just a rebranding or renaming of Bailey and Haskell Insurance. And John Haskell was brilliant in the construction space. And at that point in time, even though John is still working with us well in and engaged, we needed some continuity in that knowledge in construction. So we did two things. Brett came on board, a lot of construction experience, and then I also hired John Schmidt, who was an underwriter, the lead underwriter for the construction unit for Travelers here, and he was going to retire. And so the goal was, let's build real expertise and knowledge first. So I mean, think about it, it's been 15 years. Yeah. But steady as she goes, right, Brett? I mean, we don't try to rush this. It takes a while to become, you said the mile deep. Well, it takes a while to become a mile deep. It takes experiences, it takes growing it. So that initial version was, how do we seed or plant the seed for the growth of construction in the organization? And it's since done very well. But I would just say steady growth and refocusing and pivoting along the way.
So that hits on my next point, right? And I just want to say as well, John Haskell and John Schmidt, absolutely critical to the growth of that as well, and the wealth of knowledge that they had. But you hit on it, steady as she goes. what does the next 5 to 10 years look like for OneGroup and the construction unit?
Yeah, we've reached a great pivot point. I mean, I would say one is we're going to probably invest. No, we are going to invest actually shortly in more expertise in the construction industry. Really, already a mile deep. That's what they've done. Expertise to grow the team. The second thing, we've reorganized around actually how do we manage and build that growth. So success brings with it its own problems. My biggest fear always is, do we lose our culture? One of those is that, yes, we've grown, but how do we be small? How do we treat every client as if we were when we were smaller? A very important concern. So, really recruiting and hiring people that want to do that in a world that's become more transactional. So you'll see us, the second thing is really organizing around, going from we're specialists in this area to a practice. Where we're dedicating people in their development, their growth. We have a number of people already, so it's easy to pull them together, but how do we really drive even deeper expertise? I'm sure there's other opportunities to bring more resources to bear. We're always looking for them as to how we grow the business. So it's time to really be able to energize that with investment and focus, I would say. So. I don't know. We're doing well. We're in 5 states. Our construction operations are mostly in New York State and a little bit in Pennsylvania. So I really see them growing across the country. I think we have other practices like this in food and agriculture that sell business across the country. I think we're ready to keep taking it to that new level. And really just creating a bigger density in what we do and a bigger opportunity.
So there it is. I hope you learned a little bit more about our story, our genesis, where we came from, where we hope to go. Super excited about the future and everything that it holds. And appreciate that, Pierre.
You're very welcome, Brett. But I think it's really been a pleasure to watch how this has evolved. Thank you to your leadership, really. You were a little green around the edges when you started. but never unenthusiastic, that's for sure. And never once wavered. So Brett didn't mention it, but he is actually going to be the leader of our practice and has already accumulated a great part of the organization together. So thank you for that, Brett.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.